So I'm going to say just a few words about, actually I'll back up. I was once told that if you want to sound like you know something, you should always start by saying, there are 3 things you should know about this. There are 3 things you should know about the Local Democracy Report. What we measured, how we measured it, and what we learned. What we are measuring are 5 dimensions of good local governance. And we start with the person, with active citizens, with citizens who know their rights, who have access to information, who are included, whether they're a woman or a man, a minority or a majority, that they have voice. Then we measure whether the government has moved services down to the local level. That's called administrative decentralization. We measure whether there has been political decentralization, whether local people can make their own decisions. I was in a meeting in Washington last week, and the former First Lady of South Africa and Mozambique, Rasa Michel, said, you know, it takes a very confident government to tolerate a local body making its own decisions that they might not like. So building that, giving local communities that political freedom to chart their own course is the 3rd thing we measure. The 4th thing we measure is there any money in the hands of the local government? Do they have fiscal power? Can they raise taxes? Do they receive funds from the center? Here in the US, 20 or 30% of all public funds are local. In Bangladesh, it's about 2%. So this is a big problem. And finally, and this was taught to us by activists across Mexico, can all the sectors plan together? Because if you create grand plans and then you elect a new government, they throw out the old plans, and then the next government throws out those plans, and the road never gets built. So you've got to have a way to have planning exist across the whole community. So we measure what's in the law on those 5 dimensions, and then we measure what's actually happening in those 5 dimensions, and there's a gap between the law and the reality. So we've measured that. How did we measure it? One thing we learned from last year is that no individual really knows all the information that we need. And we had polled last year, and last year's report is here, we're very proud of it. We polled individuals. This year, after conversations and recommendations from UNDEF, we decided to really put the empowerment in the hands of civil society organizations who call together multi-stakeholder focus groups, including government, intergovernmental agencies, the private sector, women's groups, other civil society actors, to come to a consensus on the state of participatory local democracy in their country. Those meetings were held in countries that I never dreamed I would be doing Skype calls with. Azerbaijan, and Tajikistan, and Lebanon, and Jordan. Places where local democracy and democracy itself is new. Some countries like Sudan, where it's hardly existed at all. So countries with new and fragile democracies, it turns out, are taking major initiatives to decentralize and to have people participate. So what we learned, first of all, the surprise winners in this year's ranking, Africa. In fact, 4 of the top 5 countries this year are from Africa. The country that had one of these stakeholder group discussions, Ethiopia, of all the countries that had those discussions, Ethiopia came in number 1. They're number 3 in our ranking. A couple of others had individual votes. And that was a surprise. Senegal, Ethiopia have both really deeply believe in the power of the community to create a better future. And Ethiopia in particular has invested an enormous amount of money in training local level health workers, local level agriculture extension agents, And every civil society group I talk to in Ethiopia, while they have some complaints about national level civil society space, they really endorse the government's commitment to local democracy. The MENA countries, the Middle East and North Africa, scored the lowest, which is not to be surprising because many of these are actually kingdoms. They're not even democracies at the local level. But they are all in the process of implementing new local democracy initiatives, and some of the case studies are included in this year's report. Central Europe, we had a meeting earlier today. Central Asia, Eastern Europe, those countries are also really raising a new consciousness among civil society groups and are forging good futures, hopefully by getting progress in these areas. So there is good news for local democracy in this report. We have rankings of 52 countries, 32 of which held these multi-stakeholders focus group discussions. So we feel very good about that data. And we also feel very good about the overall process of people in the struggle to regain control over their own lives and destiny. So after the talking part, if you have any specific questions, I'll be here and we can talk about it. But it's, to me, finally, it's starting to get some traction, not only at the grassroots where it matters, but also, as Osa was saying, in national policy and in the SDGs. So, the next person I want to introduce is a gentleman who I admire greatly, a terrific Australian diplomat who took up the challenge of leading the UN's work on local democracy and on other issues, on all forms of democracy actually, and on its partnerships. Roland Rich.